Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. Last week, I was able to achieve 2 feats in running, which made me very proud, especially considering how my general fitness has been for the majority of my life. So on last Sunday, I ran the City2Surf in 81 minutes, and that is an entire 10 minutes faster than my very first attempt in 2023. And so I was incredibly proud of that because a 10-minute improvement is huge. And whilst my time is great for me and I'm proud of it, if you look in the grand scheme of racing, the person who came fastest in City2Surf, they generally do about 40 minutes to complete the 14 kilometers. So they're twice as fast as me, but my goal is not to run fast. It's simply this year was to do better than I did in the previous year and get through it, because I know I've faced a lot of running injuries since I've started running. And for me, it was getting back into it, taking training a bit more seriously than I have in the past, and as always, having a good time doing it, which I absolutely did. So I was very proud of my 81-minute time, and that worked out to a pace of about 5 minutes and 43 seconds per kilometer. So the fact that I was able to maintain a pace of less than 6 minutes per kilometer over that 14-kilometer distance, I was extremely happy with that. And the other feat I did last week was in training for the City2Surf. I did a 5-kilometer run where I finished that 5 kilometers in just over 26 minutes. My pace was 5 minutes and 14 seconds per kilometer. And I was absolutely panting, but that's actually the fastest I've ever run in my entire life over that distance. And so I'm incredibly proud of what I was able to achieve last week. And there's a few key lessons that I can pull out from race day, from the day I did City2Surf this year, and the training in the lead up for it. And the 2 big lessons that I can take away from my training, and mind you, like I said, I am literally twice as slow as the fastest person. I do not like running professionally. I generally don't even like running fast. My preferable pace is a very slow park run where I can enjoy speaking to my friends. I can take in the smells, the sights of wherever I am. But when I do run on occasion in one of these events, of course, naturally, I want to try and do well. And that's what I was trying to do this year. So none of this is professional running advice. But the way I personally dealt with it was decoupling my goal, which was, how can you do City2Surf next year, or this year for me, 2024, and do better than what you did last year? And so how can you do it so you're more comfortable and you're not as exhausted and you're not injured when you get to the finish line, which I was in 2023. I developed shin splints during the City2Surf. So I was running the last few kilometers in absolute pain. I had cold sweats, I had chills. I remember I was literally almost having a fever running down because my body was not happy with that race because I was significantly undertrained for it. And if I also look at the city marathon, I did very similar thing. You're not meant to accidentally run a marathon. And so even though my time was very slow, I was still within the pace group, because I finished it in, I think, just over 6 hours. So horrible time in terms of marathon times, but considering I did it with no training, good. What was bad was, again, I came out with so many injuries. The shin splints got aggravated. I developed lots of runner's knee. There were so many issues. I was in a lot of pain for the months following. And so for me, the goal was, how can you do one of these running events and actually come out feeling okay? Like, naturally you're going to be sore because you pushed yourself, but I didn't want to be injured. And so as I've been moving around the world, one thing I've done in as many cities as I can is try to do longer distance runs. And I knew my target was 14 kilometers for the City2Surf. So I did a couple of longer runs. I remember being in Paris and doing a 12K run. I remember being in London doing a 14. And doing that 14 in London, I actually aggravated my runner's knee and I had to do shorter runs for the entire month after that. But I was able to join some friends for Run Club in New York and again, did a 14 and did better than before. And I'm glad I ran with them because they definitely pushed me. And some of these guys were very serious runners. So I was able to learn from them and be inspired from their performance. But what I did is I focused on distance separately than speed. And one thing I've seen is when people try to focus on these two things at the same time, it can be quite challenging, especially if they're new runners. And I did see that happen this year with a few people who did start running this year, and the City2Surf was their first event, that on all their training runs, they were going as hard as they possibly could. And that just leads to a whole lot of injury. That's something I learned the hard way. But what I did this year is when I did my runs, when I did my 14 kilometers or 16-kilometer runs, I would do them very, very slowly. I would go at a slow pace and I would just get comfortable doing the distance. And like I said, I actually did more than 14 kilometers where I could. So I would do runs that were 15, 16 kilometers or more. And the reason I did that is I knew my goal distance was 14 kilometers, but I said, why don't you just practice slightly overshooting that by 10 to 20% where possible? Just so you get very comfortable and your cardio is well trained. And I was basically saying, if I know I need to lift 100 kilos on race day, then I'm going to practice lifting 120. So it's a very comfortable experience for me to do. And that absolutely was the case, because if I look at my cardiovascular endurance on race day, it was still challenging, but I was breathing well and I was much more comfortable than probably I've ever been going at that pace I was going. And the second thing I did, the second way I decoupled, was I focused on speed in isolation of distance. So I didn't do a lot of training for speed because, like I said, I don't really enjoy running fast. Do it occasionally, but it's not really my thing. I'm just happy to be running, and I'm happy I've been running consistently for the cardiovascular and health benefits. I'm about to turn 30 and I am basically in the best shape of my life, and I still think I can do a lot better. So for me, it's a huge achievement, and I'm just happy to be where I am and just get more comfortable and live a better lifestyle where I incorporate more exercise. But when I did focus on speed, I did not focus on distance. So the fastest run I did, like I said, I ran 5 kilometers in 26 minutes. I did this just on a regular weekday, and it was only 5 kilometers. I was not trying to run. I was not trying to train my entire distance at a pace that I could not maintain. So I decoupled that speed goal. I said, look, just do 5 kilometers as fast as you can. And I was absolutely huffing and puffing doing that 5 kilometers. It was a cold night. I was not used to the Sydney winter, even though Sydney winter isn't crazy as it can be around the world. I think that because I've been living in almost permanent summer conditions for the last 8 to 9 months, because I've been traveling around the world and effectively avoiding any country with winter, is I was not used to the cold and I was not used to running that pace, but I was able to push myself just for 5 kilometers. And that was probably a good enough point where I did not injure myself trying to do that pace over an even longer distance. Because the last thing I would have wanted to happen was for my running form to decline to the point where I now just redevelop a lot of injuries. So what I did in the lead up to training day is I decoupled distance and I just focused on running at least 14 kilometers or slightly more, and I decoupled it. I did have shorter runs as well at a slower pace, which is fine, but I definitely included a few training sessions where I was focused on doing the distance or doing slightly more than the distance I knew I was going to have to do, just so I have that contingency. And if you're ever doing any sort of planning, I think contingency is a wonderful thing to have. If you've ever done any sort of project management or budgeting or scheduling work, then you will know that it is great to have contingency, that the cost of materials is likely to might go 10 to 20% more. Maybe your estimate was slightly off and maybe prices went up. Maybe things are going to take 10 to 20% more because you got sick or somebody else got sick in your project. So the same principle applied to when I was training for running. When it came to distance, I tried to have a contingency of doing 10 to 20% more than the distance I was trying to do. And I made sure that was separate from speed because I didn't want to injure myself. I just wanted to be able to jog the distance. And when I did focus on speed, it was a short distance and I was just focusing on pushing myself. And I didn't do a lot of that. Like I said, I think I only did speed training once or twice in the whole lead up to the City2Surf. And so that was really not my priority. My priority was just to get very comfortable with running, and the majority of focus was on distance, and there was a little bit of focus on getting comfortable at going at a particular pace. And so on race day, I was able to put those things together. And the next thing that I took away from the actual race day itself is because I bought tickets to the City2Surf very late, the way it generally works is you have different waves. The people who are the athletes, the really fast people who are doing it in 40 minutes to 50 minutes, they are all the way at the front and they have to wake up very early and they have like a 6 or 7 o'clock start time. And they've gone ahead and they've finished their race in 40 minutes. And every half an hour, there will be another group of people with different colors. Now, I happen to buy my tickets very late, which is very silly of me. And because of that, I was in the very last wave, the orange wave, and the City2Surf. For a bit of context for those of you who aren't aware of it, it's very different to when I did the Sydney Marathon, for example, because it is not a race just for predominantly runners. It's actually a fun run, and there is a lot of people who just enjoy walking. It's definitely something I want to do in a City2Surf one year. I think I definitely want to do a year where I walk it, really enjoy the views, sit down at a cafe, take my time, do it slowly. But this year, I was trying to run it. And because I was in that very last wave, you had a lot more people who were just walking, which is a feat in its own right. Like if you are walking the City2Surf, it is not challenging. Like it is 14 kilometers. There's a lot of uphill. There's a lot of downhill, very challenging. But in that orange wave, not only was I in that last wave, so there's now lots of walkers ahead of me and people who are going slower. There's 90,000 people in this race. So the really fast people filter out quickly, but then you have hordes and hordes and hordes of people who are either going at slower paces or outright walking. And because I was at the end of the orange wave as well, I remember when the race started, I was very underslept. I often sleep badly before any sort of big event, even if it's something as simple as just taking a flight. For whatever reason, my mind can become very hyperactive. If I'm thinking about something, I won't necessarily sleep very well. So I was underslept. And I'd had my coffee, I'd met up with a friend, had breakfast, where right at the end of the orange wave, and as soon as we get past the finish line, I'm trying to jog and I'm just realizing that there are so many people walking. And I remember there was a time there's a overpass that you need to go under when you're doing City2Surf. And there were so many people walking. It was like, there was a part of my brain that wanted to say, how are you actually meant to run during this race? Is it actually going to be feasible for you to run? Now, I always know that when you do the City2Surf, as I said, it's a fun run, so you do have people who walk it as well. Last year, I did it in an earlier wave. And even then, one of my experiences was you're not running straight. When you run that 14 kilometers in the City2Surf, if you're not in one of those elite groups, chances are you are not running straight. You are actually going to be weaving around people, running through people, running around because there are going to be people in your way. And of course, you can't go and bump into them. That's just going to slow you down even more, aside from the fact that it's incredibly rude and there's nothing wrong with walking. I think that's what the event is for, but it is one of these challenges that you have to anticipate when you are doing the City2Surf. And so when I was right at the back of the orange wave, I've never been in a wave this slow, because even the previous year I was much earlier, there were a higher proportion of people running with me. But the fact that I was right at the back and there was so many people walking, there was a part of my brain for the first 5 to 10 minutes of the race where I was like, Hassie, are you actually going to be able to run this? Is it actually going to be possible for you to run, or should you just give up and walk because you're not actually going to make a good time and do your best? There's just so many people here. And there was so many times where I felt like that, and I felt mildly demoralized because I all of a sudden found myself stuck in between just surrounded by pedestrians. And initially that was huge. In the first 5 minutes, I wasn't even sure whether it was going to be possible to run because that overpass that you have to go under is incredibly congested. But I remember saying absolutely screw it. I ran up onto some sort of ledge. I jumped up onto it and ran as fast as I could to try and get around the pedestrians. And it did get a bit better after the first kilometer or two, because a lot of the walkers then were falling back and there was a bit more space to run. But there were many times over the next 12 kilometers in the City2Surf where I did find myself stuck behind people, and a part of my brain definitely wanted to say, screw it, just slow down and stay behind these people. But the answer was no. You're going to run back, you're going to run around them, and you're going to keep going. And I'm very happy I did that. But it's one of these things where I think it's just so natural for our brains to tell us that you shouldn't do this, we should stop. it's not worth doing it because we naturally resort to the easiest possible path. And so that is my other big lesson, that I and you, when you're doing anything you're going to do where you're slightly uncomfortable, there are going to be so many little signals where the devil, I'm going to call it the devil is encouraging you to not do what you set out to do. They're going to say, take it easy. And they're not literally saying this, but you are going to be given messages that whatever path, whatever goal you are trying to achieve is not worth doing it because there are these obstacles in the way. And I think that is always going to happen. I am always going to face that for the rest of my life. And there's nothing you can do. So it is simply a matter of saying, okay, there's this obstacle here. It's okay for me to feel this doubt. It's okay for me to want to feel like I want to quit. Why? Because that's what we're designed to do as humans. We are designed to look for the easiest path. But I'm not going to judge myself for feeling that way. I am going to try and push ahead and do it. And so I'm grateful that I had the second part of my brain, which said, okay, this is what the lizard part of your brain that wants to take it easy wants to do because there's too many people walking in front of you. But the other part of your brain, which is more novel, wants to go ahead. So I'm glad I listened to it. And I'm not ashamed of myself for actually thinking that maybe I should slow down or maybe I shouldn't try and run this race. And it's a whitewash because the irony is I was having these thoughts in the first 2 kilometers. There was another 12 kilometers to go, where the congestion did ease up. And the fact that I was willing to quit and thinking about quitting just in the first 2 kilometers is truly a lesson for myself. And it's something that I need to remind myself of, that with many of the endeavors that I am going to try and achieve, I am going to be faced with, roadblocks in the first 2 kilometers. And I really should be very careful about assessing whether I should stop what I'm trying to do, because chances are these things are temporary and they will come to pass and they can be overcome. So my 3 big takeaways from race day, from City2Surf, from doing it this year, and probably getting into the best shape that I've been in my life at 30 years old, is it's never too late to develop the physical side of your body. The fact that I've seen 80-year-old people running marathons and they started at 60 years old absolutely says that, like, it states that you are not limited by whatever perceptions you had of your old self. I used to think that I was very unathletic. I never ran. I never did the cross countries. I was horrible at the shorter distance athletics. I just was not fit. But looking back now, there are people I knew in high school who were coming first in all these races and who were incredibly fit. And at almost 30 years old, I'm like, well, you know what? I'm actually not that much slower than you. And we did the same event and I'm actually not that far behind you. And so I'm not saying this as a competition thing or I'm better than them, but what I'm trying to say is that there was clearly a perception I had of myself and my fitness that could be overcome by training. And just to state, like, this is not Olympic level stuff. The people who run the fastest in races like the City2Surf are doing it in half the time that I did. I'm not trying to get to their pace. I'm just trying to do better than I've ever done. So the big thing is, I think, when you, start to get to the age of 30, you kind of realize that in your 20s and your teens, the people who were the smartest or who were doing the best in school, doing the best in university, getting the prestigious jobs, that was very much what the status signaling, that those were the status markers back then. It's like, who were the smartest people? But now I talk to more people who are 30 and people who've gone and done the grind and done things. And a common thing I hear from everyone is, I wish I looked after my health more because I realize that's more valuable. And going into my 30s now, which I'm about to do very soon, I realize the real status symbol is, are you healthy? Are you a healthy person? So the number one is, I'm happy I've been able to get into the best shape of my life, and I'm super excited to take that to the next level. And that is not about getting faster. That is simply about being healthier, being happier. My other takeaway was when I was trying to achieve that goal, it was decoupling it into separate parts. And when I was training for the City2Surf, I decoupled it into distance, so focus on doing the distance, and there was a lesser focus on doing some shorter distances, but focus on speed. So I did these 2 things separately, which allowed me to not get injured throughout this process. And when I look at how things are panning out, I guess, professionally and in terms of my skills development, I can absolutely see how decoupling things and focusing on things in isolation, while it may look crazy, especially if you're doing this in a non-fitness domain, so maybe you take time off work to go build something, it may look crazy externally, but if you're wise about this, you can really focus on those constituent parts and you can put them back together at some time in the future. And that is what I did on the race day. In preparation, I focused on distance and speed separately, and I brought them together on the day that I actually needed to run the City2Surf and beat my previous time. So I was able to do it 10 minutes faster. And then my third takeaway from race day is I naturally faced hesitation when I realized that there were so many people walking in front of me and that it wasn't going to be easy to have a very clean run where I could run as fast as I could. And whilst that did undoubtedly add some more time to the time that I took to run the City2Surf, there was a big part of me that, because of those obstacles, because of the high foot traffic, the large number of people walking ahead of me, my monkey brain did want to give up because it simply seemed too hard. And the third takeaway is for me, it's okay, I'm going to have hesitation, but I should not always give into it. Maybe there are times where it's valid to give into those things, but during the City2Surf, that was not a valid reason to stop trying, and so that is something that I need to keep in mind. So with that, I'm going to end this episode here, and to all of you listening to this, I wish you great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.